right. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's festival. This is the first ever Women Blaze Trails virtual festival. We have been going since just before 9 o'clock this morning. We had an amazing 8 hours of events to start off the festival. And tomorrow and Sunday, we're just doing it again. We've got just over 8 hours Saturday, just over 8 hours Sunday of connecting with women, amazing women, scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists from all around the world. In fact, this morning, we started our day in the Philippines. We jumped to India, to Colombia, to the UK, to the US, over to Svalbard. We were bouncing all across the globe, and we intend to do that for the next 3 days as we share the stories of 50 amazing women scientists and explorers. So before we get into tonight's lineup, we have 4 incredible speakers lined up for tonight. But before we get into that, I want to jump into a few housekeeping things. The first thing I want to do is take a minute to introduce Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So we are all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms through virtual guest speakers and field trips. We want to inspire that next generation of scientists and explorers. What we do is and always will be 100% free for classrooms everywhere. So we want that level playing field where any classroom, any student, anywhere can join in these events. Since 2015, we've hosted well over 2,000 live events for classrooms, had over 500,000 students joining in, and had scientists and explorers from over 80 countries broadcast with us. So it's been quite an adventure, and it continues. So this is a free festival, but we are trying to raise funds for a month of classroom events. So a month of classroom events is 50 live events. So it's a big undertaking. If you are interested in helping us with that adventure, you can head over to the website, womenblazetrails.com. You can find the schedules there, bios, you can tune in live there. And then of course, there is that option to donate if you do want to help us out. If you want to learn more about Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, it's just exploringbytheseat.com. You can see we've got a great lineup of classroom events. Every February, we kick all the men out and host Women in Science and Exploration for the students joining in across America and beyond. Please, if you're tuning in, share via social media. We love to get eyes on what we're up to. Use the hashtag WomenBlazeTrails. And then, of course, tag us on Instagram or Twitter. We're just the initials. EBTSOYP, rolls off the tongue, EBTSOYP, so that we know what you are up to. Last thing I want to mention is some of the groups who are helping us make this possible. So huge shout out to Meridian Treehouse, my good friend Wes. It's his organization, and they're doing amazing things in the space of VR and live events. So definitely take a look at the Meridian Treehouse website. OSA Conservation is an amazing organization in Costa Rica. We do regular events with them live from the rainforest, whether we're hanging out in the jungle canopy or checking out their reforesting, rewilding projects. In fact, we'll have 2 virtual field trips with them this weekend. We'll be up in the canopy of the rainforest. They'll be hanging in their harnesses, talking to us about biodiversity, and then we'll visit their rewilding operations, which are pretty incredible. I want to give a shout out to the Explorers Club. They're celebrating the 40th year anniversary of women joining the club. There is such an amazing history of female explorers, even before this. But there's quite a rich history, and there's all kinds of events that they're running over the next year. And then Reach the World, another great education organization. What they do is they pair classrooms with students who are traveling abroad, and the classrooms meet with the students regularly. It's kind of like the ultimate pen pal thing. It's pretty darn cool. And lastly, a big shout out to Lenovo Edu. They are sponsoring this weekend, and they have launched a great community for educators and students, really just to help everybody navigate this new virtual world where we find ourselves doing more and more online. And there's so many great education tools being developed. It's a place to talk, to learn, be with your peers, and get advice. So definitely do check that out. Okay, I think that's more than enough from me. I think we need to get into our first event for tonight. Couldn't be more excited to have Jill Heinerth joining us. She is an underwater explorer, a writer, a photographer, a speaker, a filmmaker, a pioneer of technical rebreather diving. She's led expeditions into icebergs in Antarctica, volcanic lava tubes, submerged caves all over the planet. Jill is the first explorer in residence of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. She's obviously also a fellow of the Explorers Club. We're broadcasting to the Explorers Club Facebook channel right now as well. And then her book, Into the Planet. If you don't have it, get a copy of it. Next time I see Jill, she's gonna have to sign it for me. It's been lauded, I mean, everywhere. Wall Street Journal, Oprah Magazine, New York Times. So pretty awesome to have Jill joining us live today. I'm going to bring her in. Hey, Jill, how you doing?
Hello, great to see you.
Oh, it's so good to have you joining us. Oh, and the kids' book too. Where do you get the time, Jill? You've always got something awesome on the go.
Yeah, I keep myself pretty busy.
All right, I think that's the only way to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Jill. Well, it's a pleasure to have you kicking off our evening event. I am going to let you take over for a little bit, and then we'll see what questions come in via the chat.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to be with you all. I'm going to share a little bit about my life as an explorer. And I explore in a place that not too many think about. It's black, because I swim through the veins of Mother Earth. So I'm swimming in water-filled cave passages beneath your feet, and it's far more than blackness. These caves are like museums of natural history. They contain information about Earth's past climate, about past civilizations that have used these as portals to another world and left behind cultural assets in these places. But we also study biology in underwater caves, because even though things will never, ever see the light of day if they live in these caves, there are animals that can live in these spaces, never, ever encountering the sunlight. There's so many more other scientists that I get to work with. And it's extraordinary, because I become the hands and the eyes for scientists and engineers in these environments. I'm their specialist, bringing back information and samples for them. And as you can see, sometimes it is like swimming through a crystal chandelier. These places are stunningly beautiful, and it's an enormous privilege for me to, at times, be the first person to see a place and bring back information from these places. Like, we know more about space than we do about underwater caves. Now, the tools that I have with me for my work are cameras. Obviously, I'm always going in to shoot still photographs as well as video, whether it's for educational research or for television programs. That's what I'm using those tools for. But I'm also using specialized life support technologies as well, something called rebreathers. Rebreathers are very similar to what an astronaut wears to do a spacewalk. It recycles our exhaled breath and allows us to basically conserve molecules and create as few exhaled bubbles as possible, thus preserving the environment that I'm swimming through. So as I mentioned, I work with so many different types of scientists. Here, we're looking at paleoclimatology, Earth's past climate. I'm working with paleontologists and also with archaeologists studying these places and the remarkable finds that we have. I also work with hydrologists and hydrogeologists who are interested in where water is moving inside the planet and how we might protect that for future generations. And then, as I mentioned, I work with biologists studying the unique life within these underwater cave systems. Most of the work that I do today, I want to have a very specific purpose, because for me, if I'm going to take the extreme risks that are involved with working in these environments, I want to be sure that I'm doing something positive and bringing back information for, a better understanding of our planet. And so I'm focusing mostly in water literacy issues and climate change these days. And my work takes me all over the planet. So sometimes you'll find me, camping in the Arctic on top of the Northwest Passage here. In this case, making a film. But you might find me in a place where you wouldn't even imagine a dive site, like here in the western desert of the Sahara, because there are dive sites here too, some pretty unusual ones, in fact. This is almost right on the Libyan border in Egypt. Very interesting place. But you'll also find me underneath the Ural Mountains in Siberia, where I dive in the world's longest gypsum cave that's submerged, or inside volcanic lava tubes, in this case, inside the Monte Corona volcano in Lanzarote. But my work takes me inside flooded mines and even in places like where I'm swimming with sea lions, for instance. But it's not just caves and mines, it's also shipwrecks. So, this shipwreck in Newfoundland, Canada, in fact. So, a lot of my work takes me all over the place. But what I really wanted to share with you today is the mindset, like how I do these things, how I face these challenges and fear, and the tools that I use in order to tackle very big problems. That's what I call the explorer's mindset. To begin with, I have always been this very curious person from childhood onward. So, curiosity, novelty, and sensation seeking really describe sort of who I am and what I do. And it turns out that those characteristics may actually be defined by my genes. Because adventurers, explorers, many of us, like perhaps as many 15 to even 30% of the population, may have what we call the wanderlust gene, the 7R, DR4 7R allele that describes us as those sensation seekers, curiosity seekers. We might have been the hunter-gatherers in, early civilization where others stayed at home and planted the crops and took care of the homestead. We might have been the ones that were out gathering. So the way that I use that mindset is through what I call evolved risk taking. So it's a matter of perspective. Now, when you look at a man walking around on the surface of the moon, you don't necessarily say, oh my goodness, he's taking so many crazy risks. That's nuts. But I've been labeled that way in the past. And it could partly be because I'm a woman. They think, oh my gosh, why are you going into this dangerous place? But for me, I only take these risks when I have fully examined, how I'm going to take these risks. So I use what I call mindful preparation in order to solve big problems. If we look at big problems, like let's just say climate change, for instance, we can't always say, oh, this is how we solve it, right? It's too big a problem. And so we have to kind of break things down and do mindful preparation to take the next best steps towards a solution. So when you can't solve the big stuff, solve the little stuff instead. So I begin by identifying all the risks and all the fears. And the fears can be very real, or they can be just, completely psychological issues in my head. But before I do a dive, I have to make that list. What could get me in trouble today? So I really work through that list of fears and risks, and I pre-visualize those to create a toolbox of solutions so that by the time I actually submerge underwater, I know how I'm going to deal with anything that might happen. So I've literally sat down, like I'm dressed, I'm in my equipment, and I've gone, okay, well, if that hose blows, I'm going to have to reach this valve. Can I reach it? Oh, yes, I can still reach it. There it is. I've reminded myself how to do that action. And so I pre-visualize and rehearse all of those things so that I have the toolbox to move forward and solve problems. And I visualize success too. And that's like to deal with all the emotional issues, but also the motor skills necessary to solve problems. And long before I even do the dive, I've done a lot of rehearsal and repetition. So there's a lot of training involved in what I do. And we train over and over and over again. And, for instance, after a time like this, when we've all been on these stay-at-home orders in Ontario where I live, that means I've been out of the water for about 5 weeks now. And when I get back into the water, I'll have to rehearse and practice and repeat things a little bit more to bring myself back up to a certain level of currency. Because we have to expect that there will be a crisis. We have to expect that there's going to be roadblocks for whatever we do in life. And when we expect and sort of premeditate these crises, then we can also pre-visualize the success for dealing with those. And it comes down to one thing: when you're really, really scared or startled, the most important thing is to learn how to breathe. So if something happens underwater, like I'm suddenly trapped and the guideline is broken and I can't see in the cave and my heart rate starts to go up and my breathing starts to go up, the first thing I have to do is take a very deep cleansing breath right down into my hips, filling up my lungs all the way up into my neck. And as I do that deep cleansing breath, I tell myself, emotions, you won't serve me well right now. So I separate myself from the emotions and I say, all right, go away. We'll deal with you later. It's time to be pragmatic. And as I'm pragmatic, I start taking very small steps towards success. So I don't know the big answer, how I'm going to get unstuck, how I'm going to patch the guideline, how I'm going to get back to clear water, how I'm going to get to the exit of the cave. But I can take the next best step forward. Okay, first, I'm going to patch the guideline, right? And then as you take that step forward, you think positive and remain positive. Like, okay, I did that. All right, what's next? And you move on. So it's very important to stay focused on the present. I'm not thinking about, oh my God, I might die, right? I have to stay focused immediately on the next step ahead. And I celebrate the small victories. So when I've patched the guideline and gotten unstuck and I've begun to move my way towards the exit, I can celebrate and continue to move forward. Because if you start focusing on that doorway, that exit of the cave, or the big, big problem that you can't quite solve yet, then you can really lose yourself and the emotions can come flooding back in. All the while, it's really important for us to recognize our limits. So I'm all about exploration and discovery and moving forward, but I'm also always aware that at any time I might need to call the dive and abort. It might be when I'm within like an inch of success. It might be as I'm reaching out to this proverbial treasure chest, and I may need to go, whoa, not today. It's time to turn around. It's time to abort. There's always going to be another opportunity. And when I do that, I want to reframe that abort, reframe that. It's not quitting, it's not failure, it's actually discovery learning. It's, I've gotten to a point where I know I need to turn around. I've learned something, but I need to go back, reassess, and make a new approach for next time. So it's not failure. I mean, the light bulb wasn't invented the first time around. There were 100 iterations before there was success, but we don't think of Thomas Edison as a failure, right? He just had discovery learning opportunities each time something didn't work as he expected. And after you've, gotten out of the situation and you're sort of back out of the cave on land, breathing the fresh air in the sunlight again, don't forget that you need to process whatever just happened and give yourself an opportunity to honor the emotions that might have come with that situation. So you've kind of taken that breath out now, and it's okay to let the emotions flood back in because you must deal with them. If you were terrified because of something that happened or just stigmatized because of a failure, you've got to give yourself time to reprocess those emotions again. And that's a mindful assessment that can offer focus. So when it all comes down to it, and I'm staffing an expedition, these are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the best camera operator or the best diver or the best director or the best sound guy. I'm looking for people that are really good thinkers, really good team players, right? People need to be resilient, strong mentally, and versatile. Like, I'm really happy if you're a good camera operator or a good diver, but are you willing to do arts and crafts to make a little filter for a light or a sampling device for something we're about to do inside the cave? Because I need those kinds of people too. People that can think outside the box and outside of their specialty and do other stuff. So I need people who have neuroplasticity, who can multitask and collaborate well and also have empathy. I want good people who are good to each other and support each other in the field. Like, when somebody brings me a cup of tea when I'm having a bad day, it's like, oh, thank you. That's just as important as the note-taking that was necessary for the scientific activity that we just embarked on together. And then I also need someone who understands how to nurture and understands global interconnectivity. We have the world's knowledge at our fingertips. We have the world's experts at our fingertips. And if you're able and willing to get online and use the tools at our fingertips, you can build a bigger and better team for all of us. So those are the kinds of skills and talents that I'm looking for when I'm staffing an expedition team. And it's something to keep in mind no matter what scientific pursuit you're interested in. Those other skills are equally, if not even more important than your area of specialization. And probably, more important today as we all become these multitaskers with many, many different literacies that we're capable of. The last thing I want to leave you with before I just open this up for questions is that, hey, it's okay to be scared. I want to work with people that are afraid. I want to be afraid before I go on a dive. I want to dive with somebody that's afraid because it means that we both care about the outcome of our choices. And it means that we're both willing to be explorers, because as we step into the darkness together, prepared and having assessed the risks appropriately, and we stand on that threshold of the blackness and just a little bit of light coming into the cave, that's where we stand on the threshold of opportunity to do something that's new for us individually, or perhaps new for humanity. So fear is a good thing. It drives you towards discovery and exploration. So I think we should just open this up and have an opportunity to answer some questions that I think Joe is gathering online right now. And it could be anything about the underwater work that I do, about fear, or about the tools that I think explorers need.
All right, that sounds good to me. Jill, thanks for a great presentation. I love that you brought that up at the end, is it's okay to be afraid. I've been diving for well over a decade, but every dive, you kind of still get those little butterflies. And I think it's
That's
because
a good thing.
exactly, you're thinking, you're making sure everything's prepared. I think the day those butterflies are gone, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, very cool. Well, the first question that's come in online so far. So there is a chat sidebar on Facebook and on YouTube. So go ahead, those who are tuning in, and send some questions in. But the first one we have, your rebreather pretty much makes you an underwater superhero. So Rob is wondering, how long can you stay underwater?
My longest mission, diving mission's been 22 hours. So yeah, most rebreathers have a range of somewhere between 4 and 6 hours without any special additions to them. But these days we might use more than one rebreather or additional strategies to stay longer.
All right. Well, I've got another question that just came in here from Savannah, and they're wondering, well, first of all, they say amazing presentation, which yeah, awesome. When did you start your diving? What got you into diving in the first place?
I wanted to dive from the time I was a little kid, from watching the Apollo missions on TV and watching Jacques Cousteau. I did my first dives in a swimming pool as a teenager, but I didn't get certified until I was in university, because it was really more of just like saving the money to buy equipment and do the training. But for people out there that are interested, you can start diving when you're 10 years old now. And there are dive shops all over the world that'd be happy to take you in for an open water scuba class.
Absolutely. So another, cause that you championed is protecting our water, our groundwater. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to dive in, the water that we're drinking?
So, one thing I like to say is that, hey, the ocean begins beneath your feet. Wherever you are listening from today, the ocean begins beneath your feet. Because, I'm swimming through the veins of Mother Earth. I'm swimming in the sustenance of the planet, this beautiful, clear water that we use for drinking or for fueling industry or for serving agriculture. So I'm in that drinking water, but I'm at the beginning of the pipe. And anything that happens on the surface of the earth, anywhere on the planet, can soak into the ground and affect your drinking water resources. And then eventually, my pipeline of cave water will feed an estuary, a river, a lake, and head out into the ocean. So the ocean begins beneath your feet, wherever you are.
All right. I love that. Absolutely. Okay. Another great question here online, wondering about a memorable expedition where maybe there was a moment of fear or a real big learning experience.
Ooh, I've had a lot. I remember an early boss saying to me once, "Hey, when are we going to stop learning and when are we going to start making money?" But yeah, I'm all for learning experiences. I did have one scary situation where I was trapped in a cave behind a scientist who was panicking, and it was in a really small cave, like literally like the size of squeezing underneath your bed. And it was a very serious problem. I mean, she was stuck, the guideline was broken, no visibility, and my life support system, one of the two halves of my life support system, started packing it in. So I had a lot of issues to deal with, and my heart raced and my respirations went up. But as soon as I took that cleansing deep breath, I was able to bring that back down under control and just focus on those steps towards getting home. But at the end of the day, I was an extra 73 minutes inside the cave than I'd initially planned. So that's a long delay. But you have to know in your heart that you have the tools, the knowledge, and the ability to get home safely, and never forget it.
Absolutely. So Jill, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like? Some of the places you've explored, nobody has been before, and very few people may follow. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of when you're pushing into a new section of a cave?
Yeah, that's one of the great privileges that I have, to be one of the first explorers. Now, when we explore a cave, we lay a guideline. So we have a spool of double braided nylon guideline that we're actually laying into the cave, and we're tying it off carefully so that if the visibility is completely blitzed and we're blind on the way out, then we can just put our hand around that guideline and follow it all the way out of the cave. Because when you explore a place for the first time, you usually do completely blitz it just because your bubbles hit the ceiling and the silt rains down on top of you. But on the outbound trip, I have to make a map. So I'm actually surveying on the way out. I'm measuring and getting directions and starting a very preliminary map of what I've just explored. Because if you don't make a map and produce the survey, it doesn't count. So it's very important. But as I go into these new places, I'm very, very carefully assessing every moment. Can I turn around? Will I be able to get out here? I'm watching my time. I'm watching my resources to make sure that I have plenty of backup time to get out, because sometimes getting out might be slower on these exploration trips.
All right. Well, Jill, you and fellow explorer Kenny Broad, you were the first to take our new satellite units.
Oh, yeah.
Size satellite units out into the field. You broadcast live from the Bahamas on the Blue Holes expedition to thousands of students, which was just awesome, a ton of fun. What advice or what message would you have for students, for young explorers, young conservationists?
Oh, wow. I would first say that absolutely nothing is impossible. So whatever you want to do in life, it is possible. There are not very many gatekeepers to stop you today if you've got the mind and the determination to do it. And I would also say start early. So, start taking pictures, start shooting videos, start writing stories. Like, no matter what you do as a scientist or an explorer, you're going to need to be a storyteller in order to get a grant, in order to do outreach work. And so develop your storytelling skills and, start your own website and start sharing those with the world so that you get comfortable speaking in front of people like this too.
All right. Great advice, Jill. I can't believe how quickly a 25-minute session goes.
I know.
Next time around, we're going to have to make these a little bit longer. Oh, I should give a shout out to your fellow Royal Canadian Geographical Society explorer and resident. George Karunas is tuning in right now. He says Jill is awesome. So
Hey, George.
If you don't have it already, check out Jill's book. It is awesome. Jill, thank you so much. Thanks for everything that you do. Thanks for the outreach. And thanks for kicking off our evening of events.
My pleasure. Have a great trailblazing weekend, everyone.
All right. Thanks so much, Jill.
Okay,
so we are going to move on to our other events, but I do want to get a message out first, and that is we were streaming this event live to the Explorers Club Facebook page, with Jill being a fellow of the Explorers Club. But now that we're moving on to some more events, the feed to the Facebook page for the Explorers Club is going to stop. So before that happens, I'm going to drop a YouTube link into the chat. So that should come up there. You can use that YouTube link to switch over and join us there, because we still have 3 great events coming up. We're going to explore the deep sea. We are going to talk about poaching in Africa and the rangers who work so hard to protect these areas. And then we're going to talk a little Indigenous knowledge and research with Lauren to wrap up the night. So that is in the chat. Switch over to the YouTube feed now, because momentarily you're going to see that feed on the Explorers Club page is going to come down. Okay. All right. Well, before we bring in our next speaker, I'm going to take a little moment to share a couple things right now. First one is, this is the second large festival that we've launched. Last May, we launched something called the Global Biodiversity Festival, or the Global BioFest. Over 3 days, we had 68 speakers representing about 30 countries. We had viewers tuning in from over 100 countries. We even produced a book out of it. In fact, I've got a copy of it right here from the Global Biodiversity Festival. So it was just a wild 3 days, and it was so much fun. We're doing it again. So in May, we'll be launching year 2. The website's going to come up again. If you go now, you can take a look at what it was like last year, but within the next few weeks, you're going to see the new material start to come up. So we hope that everybody can join us for that live event. And then just another reminder, if you're tuning in, share via social media, #WomenBlazeTrails. Of course, tag us at EBTSOYP. And for all your festival updates, head to the website. You can find the speaker listings. You can find the spot to tune in live. You can find the bios, all that kind of fun stuff. Okay, let's move on to our second event of the night. So moving from cave diving to some deep sea exploration, we have Kakani Katija joining us tonight. She is a bioengineer and a deep sea technologist. She wants to understand and learn from life in the ocean so that she can inspire innovations for the future. So through the Bio-Inspiration Lab at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, she's helping to develop technology to explore the deep sea and enable observations of animals in their natural environment. So I'm going to bring Kakani in now with us. Hey, Kakani, how are you?
Hey, Joe. How are you doing?
Good. It's great to see you.
Likewise.
And thrilled you're joining the first version, the first ever Women Blaze Trails Festival.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for including me. I'm excited to be able to share some of the stuff that we've been up to.
All right, very cool. Well, I am going to let you take over for a bit, and then we'll see what questions come in the chat for us.
Great. Fantastic. And, thank you so much again, Joe, for that wonderful introduction. And, really, I'm just very, very excited to be able to participate and share with you all some of the ways in which we observe as well as discover things in the deep sea. And bear with me while I get set up. But really, my background is interesting in that I started my, journey through the deep sea in a very strange direction, because I essentially do what I have kind of dreamed doing during my childhood, but in a very different place. And so what does that mean? Because I actually got my start in aerospace engineering. And while today I'm going to talk about the deep sea, I was really inspired by outer space. I grew up wanting to be an astronaut. And in my entire life, I've always been enamored by the search for life, right? And what we could learn by that life once we found it. And in my mind, it was astronauts. They were the ones doing that vital and important work, but in space. And I knew deep down that I wanted to absolutely do that. And so this is why I began my academic journey in aeronautics and astronautics, but then later started transitioning away. And so at some point in graduate school, I stopped looking for life in outer space and instead started looking at life in the ocean. And so what you're seeing now is not a star field, but what the ocean looks like at 500 meters deep here in Monterey Bay. And what you think might be stars, those are actually particles or detritus and waste with dead organisms and plants. And unlike our search for life in outer planets, we have yet to find it. The oceans are indeed teeming with life that we know very, very little about. And so how do I study animals in the deep sea? And I really rely on robots, robots that can go many miles deep in places. And we can use these robots, right, to go to places that people cannot access. And so this is a vehicle called Doc Ricketts. It's a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV. And a remotely operated vehicle is exactly that. It can be remotely operated using either via a tether. Somebody can sit on a ship and operate the vehicle and control it. So this particular vehicle is rated to 4,000 meters deep, and it has a suite of instruments and cameras and tools that enable observations of animals. And so using these robots, my team develops instruments that can also be added to the vehicles to understand and view animals in really different ways. And for example, we developed an imaging system that uses a laser for illumination and allows us to peer inside of animals and other novel structures in the deep sea for the first time. And so we deployed this instrument to understand an animal that has been largely little understood. And this is the instrument. It's called Deep PIV. And it's the instrument that you can see is being held onto by this manipulator arm that's attached to the remotely operated vehicle. And so the system can be deployed using this manipulator arm to very fine-tune the position of this instrument. And since it is rated to 4,000 meters, what we can do is use this laser illumination system to quantify and view anything from near the sea surface to 4,000 meters. And the very first animal we started studying with this technique was the giant larvation. And it's a little bit hard to see right now, but the larvation, the animal itself, when we zoom in, is actually what is moving. So what you're seeing is a larvation. It has a head and it has a tail, and then it's pumping or moving its tail, and everything that's surrounding that animal, well, that's made out of mucus. And that's mucus that the animal secretes from cells lining its head and blows it up much like a balloon. And with that animal pumping its tail, it's actually driving food and water into that mucus structure that to filter the food and particles away from the water. And so what this is an elaborate feeding structure that this animal creates out of mucus. And we like to call them snot palaces. But so these animals can be up to 10 centimeters long. The mucus structures can be up to 1 meter across. And these structures can be abandoned by the animals. We don't know how often they're abandoned, but we know that these structures sink rapidly to the bottom of the ocean and also play an important role in sequestering carbon, right? The whole process of putting carbon or moving carbon from near the sea surface to the seafloor, which is important for carbon cycling in our ocean. And so when I saw this animal for the first time, I had so many questions. How is this animal building this structure? Why is this structure has so much complexity? How does an animal build something so complex out of mucus without any appendages, right? No arms, no hands, no features that can be used to build this, right? And so fortunately for us, we had an instrument that could answer some of these questions. And so the way this works is you have the research vessel, which is where all the people are located during an expedition. And so we will be sitting on the research vessel operating this remotely operated vehicle that's tethered to the research vessel. And so what happens is that the research vessel experiences really different environment than the vehicle in the deep water. And so we're having to constantly communicate between the ship's crew, the scientists, the ROV pilots, the people who are controlling the ROV, to ensure that the vehicle and the ship are maintaining their relative position. And so then once you do all of this and you find an animal, the ROV pilot then maneuvers the vehicle and the laser instrument, and somehow, some way is able to place a laser sheet that's 1 millimeters wide on an animal that's 2 centimeters wide, anywhere from 200 to 400 meters deep. So it's incredible what we're able to do with these robotic systems. And so then this is an example of what this data might look like. And remember, we're using a laser sheet. So it's creating light just in one plane or one sheet. And so think of it like X-ray vision. We're seeing inside of the mucus house, the structure, as well as the animal. And so I've indicated where the animal's head and tail is, and then everything that you see around it is that mucus structure that it lives inside. And then you'll also notice that that there's other things that are flickering right in the view here, and that is particles that I showed you earlier that are scattering light. And it's actually the movement of these particles, and you can see them moving thanks to the animal's tail beating, that we can then use as a proxy for measuring directly the movement of water in that area. And so by using this technique and maintaining our position on the animal for a period of time and measuring the movement of that water, we can directly measure things like filtration rates. So like how much water are these animals processing? And so researchers in the past have come up with estimates that these animals were filtering about maybe 10 liters of water per hour. But by our measurements, what we learned instead was that these animals are filtering anywhere from 40 to up to 80 liters of water per hour. And we can scale that up based on the number of individuals that we see in Monterey Bay, that these giant larvaceans, these animals, could filter about 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools per hour, or take less than 2 weeks to filter their entire habitat in Monterey Bay. And so again, this is incredible that an animal so small with so many of them can have such a huge impact. But again, I come back to this question of how do they do it? How is this mucus structure shaped to filter all of this material for the animal to then eat? And so using that same instrument, but instead scanning with it, it can provide us with some clues. And so what you're seeing right now is that same instrument that is being used to scan through the animal and its mucus house. And so the ROV pilot is moving the ROV such that the vehicle is either moving forward or backward, moving the instrument along with it. And so what you're seeing is with every frame or at every time in this video, a new section of this mucus structure as well as the animal is illuminated. And we can use these sections much like an MRI or CT scan to piece them together and create three-dimensional models of the animal inside of its mucus house. And what you see with this animation is not only the exterior structure, but we can go inside these mucus houses, these snot palaces, and see for the first time what is going on. And you'll notice as we turn this corner into this chamber, you've got all of these other finger-like chambers that are emerging from the sides. And then these chambers all together will join in one location at one position at the animal's mouth. And so it's such an incredibly elaborate structure. You know, how does an animal do this? How does it create this? And so we're only beginning to understand all of these questions thanks to the imaging capability that we now have for these robotic vehicles. So I'm absolutely excited about the opportunities here because we can learn about larvaceans, we can learn about jellyfish, we can learn about all sorts of organisms using these kinds of imaging tools. And I don't want to stop there though, right? Because, if my goal is to search for life in our oceans, I also want to be able to observe them for a period of time. And one of the tasks that we've been trying more recently is trying to autonomously track or follow animals for a long period of time, up to 24 hours, let's say. And so we've been developing algorithms and working with other researchers to create new underwater vehicles that can do just that and track animals for a period of time. And we've had some mixed success. And so what you see here in red, the red circles indicate potential objects that we can track. And the blue dot indicates an animal, originally a salp, that we were following. And you'll notice very quickly a squid will swim right inside, and then we'll move or transition our tracking from that salp to the squid. And then shortly after that, right, you can see that squid is joined by a lot of its friends and breaking, disrupting our tracks. And so if we want to develop a robot that can basically go off and find animals and track them for a period of time, we need to be sure that we are indeed tracking the same animal for that entire duration. And so being able to distinguish between, in this case, a salp and a squid, and being able to just track that salp for the period of time is really, really important and vital for the technology that we're developing. And so here's another problem, though. Animals in the deep sea change their state. They change their situation all the time. And I like to use this example of a giant larvation. So you'll notice the animal is still inside of its mucus house, but you can also see that the house is collapsing. And then shortly after this, you'll notice that the animal starts to swim away and exit or escape that house. And there's some scientific value in being able to track the animal versus being able to track the house. If we were to follow the animal for a period of time, we might be able to answer that question about how often are these animals building their houses, right? Are they doing this daily? Are they doing this every hour? We simply do not know the answer to that. But there's also value to track that mucus structure. We don't really know how fast they sink. And knowing how fast they sink can tell us something about how much carbon is transported in the ocean thanks to these animals. And so being able to have an algorithm or the ability to track something smartly that is either the larvation or the mucus structure or the salp or the squid for these kinds of observations are incredibly important. And so these are the ideas that we've been taking into the development of a new class of underwater vehicles. And these are called the Mesobot. The Mesobot is a huge effort, part of a number of different institutions that includes my group and my institution, along with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, as well as Stanford University. And what you're seeing is a demonstration of this vehicle, the Mesobot, that is autonomously tracking this white towel. We call it a shacklefish, funnily enough. I'll tell you why. And it's as that shacklefish is moving around in our test tank, the vehicle is moving back and forth and up and down with it. And so this is a very easy demonstration of what this vehicle is capable of doing. But what we're trying to do, right? Remember, we're trying to be able to track animals really robustly. So making sure we don't lose them in the water column. And so this is where we're turning to machine learning or artificial intelligence, where we can train an algorithm and train a computer to identify objects or animals in underwater footage, and then use that information to tell us whether we are tracking a larvation versus the mucus structure. And so the green rectangle shows the animal, the larvation, and the yellow rectangle or square shows you the larvation house, the mucus house. And you'll notice that we're able to distinguish between the two features and then enable the tracking of just the animal or just the house. And so it's algorithms like this that is really required for us to not only be able to track things robustly, but to go out and find them, right? We want to be able to deploy vehicles and instruments autonomously to go out and look for and search for life so that we can understand it to scale, understand and observe these animals in their natural environment. And what we're trying to do, right, is we're trying to get to this point where we can just explore the ocean autonomously, identify and classify and know what's in our video and footage in real time, because we want to just do this work on the fly. And we really want to open up discovery of the oceans, because we've really only explored about 5% of it. And with about 90% of the life there that has yet to be discovered, and these are based on models and scientists coming up with mathematical estimates for the animals that are still out there, we still have such a long ways to go. And so I am very, very excited about the possibility of this working, of instruments and technology like this, then helping us to understand this environment and understand the animals that live here. And I think this can have a significant impact on how we increase access to the ocean's midwaters, to the unexplored places in our ocean, but really allow us to address this question about what we will personally learn from life in the deep sea. And so I hope you all will be able to join me someday and work on some of these really exciting and valuable problems. And before I close, I have so many people to thank for this work, especially members in my team, the Bioinspiration Lab, but also our collaborators at other institutions, and people who are really supporting our work. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right. Kakani, that's amazing. What a great presentation. And, as a diver myself, I love exploring the ocean. I was able to spend a little bit of time on Bob Ballard's ship and got to see how they use the ROVs and see that in action. But this is next level, being able to explore autonomously. And it's going to give us, results we couldn't have even dreamed of. So I'm pretty jealous of what you get to do. It's pretty awesome.
Well, that's what we're hoping for, right? And for us to get to that kind of realized goal of being able to fully explore our ocean, we have to really rely on autonomy and, rely on robots that can do a lot of this work. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you're tuning in via Facebook or YouTube, use that chat to send in some questions. But first, Kakani, we're curious about the percentage of time that you're spent in the field actually deploying a new technology, as opposed to being in the lab and working and testing.
Right. It really varies, and it varies year to year. And especially this last year with COVID, right? It's been challenging for everyone, but also for our marine operations. So how can we go to sea safely, so that all of our researchers and people on the ships, the crew, and our collaborators are safe? And so in normal years, we will go to sea for several expeditions, anywhere from 3 or 4 of them, and they can vary in duration, either several days or several weeks. And so that and those, in preparation for those trips, right, it takes at least a month, several months leading up to an expedition, but then also a couple months or weeks trying to, evaluate the data and analyze the data that you've collected so that it can inform you, on what you want to do next. And so, a lot of the work that we do revolves around these preparations for expeditions. But then besides that, we do a lot of simulations. We and a lot of testing or demonstrations, like in our test tank facility, because we want to make sure everything works before we go to sea, because it's costly, it's time intensive. And so there's a lot of work that we do in the background before we go out to sea and on these expeditions.
All right. So another interesting question here. Do you worry sometimes that the technology might interfere a little bit with what you're trying to watch, if it might change its behavior a little bit?
Absolutely. And that is actually something where we are definitely concerned about. And we actually turn to biology and biology literature to understand what are the sensing capabilities of the animals we're trying to study. Because the last thing we want to do is deploy instruments or vehicles that can impact the behavior we want to measure and understand. And so a lot of that went into, the development of the laser-based imaging system, the imaging systems that we've been developing in my lab, but as well as that Mesobot vehicle. For instance, with the Mesobot vehicle, you want to ensure that, one, it's very quiet. It also doesn't have a very big kind of hydrodynamic signature. So think of like a big wake that a boat would create. We wanted to ensure that, the presence of that vehicle wouldn't change the flow environment around the animal that we're trying to study. But then we also don't want to use lights that, the animal senses or can change its behavior. And so for, the laser imaging system, the imaging systems we develop, as well as the Mesobot, we rely heavily on light wavelengths that a lot of the animals in the deep sea are unable to see. And that's, higher wavelengths like red or near infrared tend to be the most successful in that sense. So I agree that is absolutely something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. Because we want to be sure that we're measuring the behavior that we want to see, not the behavior that we've imposed.
Okay, so as Jill is wrapping up her conversation, she talked about fear and how having fear is an important part of the process. Now, another word with an F we could use is failure, and so
all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But you can learn a lot from that. And it's part of the process. So is there a time or a story of a technology fail that sent you back to the drawing board?
All the time. I don't have a specific story because I think when we develop technology, we have to recognize that it's it's an iterative process. And while you might have this giant goal, let's say to build a vehicle that'll track animals in midwater, there's a lot of steps that you need to take in between that. And so really what we try and do is set small goals. And we have small hurdles that we try to jump over every time. And we often miss, we often aren't successful. And so then we have to regroup and figure out, okay, well, how would we approach this differently, or what changes might we want to make to the system? And this is it's a constant process. And really from like a technology standpoint, you almost never stop doing this, right? Because as you come up with a solution, it might not be the absolute best one, right? It might work, but it might not be like scalable. It might not be something that everybody can use. And so this process is so iterative, and you keep building from it and learning from it. And I think that's the important point is from failure, right? Failure is okay. You're not really pushing your boundaries of what's possible if you're not failing from time to time. And so by, pushing through and trying, and as long as you're learning from those failures, that's a really positive experience.
All right. Absolutely. I love the way that you frame that. There's beauty in a failure. And I think that's definitely true, especially in engineering and science and the likewise. It might not feel that way at the time, but later.
No, not always, for sure. We had, for instance, this last year with COVID, we spent weeks in the lead up to a research cruise preparing, and imagine trying to do that under these conditions with COVID and the extra additional work that went into trying to prepare for that. And the day before we took off, our cruise got canceled because of safety concerns. And it was crushing. It was because of this year and how everything worked out. It was our only cruise for the year. And for that to happen and have that be taken away from us, it was just gut wrenching. But at the end of the day, we're all healthy, we're all safe, and we'll see another day. So you just have to roll with some of these failures and learn from them. And so what we've done instead is really focus on in-lab testing and simulations, and what can we do to really fix these designs before we go out.
Okay. And so one last question before we wrap up for tonight. Watching that video of, the autonomous robot moving through the water and kind of looking and identifying different things, do you see there being a role for citizen science in this?
Absolutely. And in fact, we're starting to brainstorm in terms of trying to, make game-based education activities out of looking at this data, because it's incredible how much data the oceanographic community, the academic community, and, the citizen scientists are generating. Anytime you have a video camera underwater, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I wonder how much a video is worth, right? And, researchers are really trying to use camera data or imaging data to understand life in the ocean. And the biggest bottleneck that we're all facing is, how do we identify what's in it, and how do we scale that? And there's no way that we can do this alone, the research community. And we're trying to create opportunities using artificial intelligence, but also using citizen science to contribute to that process, so that one day we can lower a camera into the ocean and know instantly what that animal is, and be able to share that knowledge with everyone, not just researchers or scientists, but anyone logging on to see. So for me anyways, I think it's a really exciting time for ocean exploration, through citizen science, through artificial intelligence, through all these technologies that I'm hoping will engage a lot of people, not just the traditional folks involved in oceans, but also everyone else, because I think it's a place that holds so much inspiration that is largely untapped.
Okay, well, the last thing I'm going to do today is share a little banner here with your Twitter and Instagram, so people can follow along as you continue your explorations, your development of this amazing new technology. I'm excited. I think most of our viewers will be excited. And I mean, you said dropping those cameras in and being able to identify those animals, and then those moments where you drop the camera in and you can't identify because it's something new. So those are probably going to be pretty exciting moments too.
And it happens a lot. That's what's so incredible about the ocean.
All right. Well, Kakani, thank you so much for joining us. Those tuning in, do follow Kakani so you can keep up with her work. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we can't wait to host you down the line and see what you've been up to.
Thank you. You too, Joe. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, that was great. Going from deep in caves to deep in the ocean, and exploring how we can search more. I mean, we have more detailed maps of the moon and Mars than we do of our ocean floor. There's so much left to explore and discover in our ocean. Okay, let's grab a couple housekeeping things before we bring our next speaker in. As mentioned before, one of our sponsors for this event is Lenovo Edu. It's a great community for educators to get together, to talk, to share, to find great resources, to ask questions. And of course, it's a great spot for student activities and the like. So I have the link posted up there. If you want to check it out and join the community, please do take some time to do that. I also want to mention that, for those who are just tuning in again, what we do here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, all month long, every month, we host up to 60 live events each month for classrooms, guest speakers, virtual field trips. And what we do is always free for classrooms. We've never charged a classroom, and we never will. So we're using this festival as an opportunity to raise some funds for a month of events, 50 live events for classrooms. So if you like what you're seeing, if you're enjoying the events, you can head over to womenblazetrails.com. You can see options there for making donations. And then, of course, the lineup is there, the bios, all got the information you need to keep up with the next 2 days. We still have 18 or so hours of broadcasting to go, and it's been a blast. I can't wait. Okay, our next speaker, I can't wait. We've got Tara Eckert joining us. She is an artist, a geographer, a conservationist, and National Geographic storytelling grantee. Her research is focusing on wildlife crime and the poaching crisis in South Africa. So through mapping, storytelling, photography, and art, she is working to share the stories and the voices of the local rangers and individuals living alongside rhinos who experience the effects of the illicit trade of the rhino horn firsthand. So I'm going to bring her live in with us. Hey, Tara, how you doing?
Hey, Joe. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for having me here.
Of course, it is great to see you. joining us, I believe, in DC today.
Yes, Washington, DC.
Excellent. Well, Tara, you, before COVID, you got to spend some time in the field in South Africa. And, I saw some of the images you collected, some of the art that came out of it. I heard some of the stories. I'm really excited for everybody to hear a little bit about what you've been up to.
Great. Well, I'm excited to get going.
Okay. It's all you for a little bit.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Joe, for such a lovely introduction. It really is truly incredible and honestly an honor to be here, and very surreal for me to be included in the company of so many women who I actively turn to for inspiration. It's really exciting and important that we're here recognizing and celebrating women and the trails we blaze, because with all the challenges that have come with it, we've really been able to embrace ourselves. And, I personally feel pretty strongly that a man couldn't have propelled himself down the same path that I've blazed, or probably any of these paths that the trailblazers you've been hearing from during this festival have forged for themselves. And so one thing that I've always found really, really valuable on my own little journey to find my purpose and passion in life has been hearing all of the really unique and wonderful ways that the people I've admired have taken to get to where they are. No matter what their passion in life was, whether it was aligned with mine, having to do with wildlife, or perhaps outer space or rocks or whatever it was, doesn't matter. It's always helpful to hear some of those unconventional and even some of the traditional ways that women have achieved their goals. So today, I'm hoping to journey with you down my own little story, and also then take a dive into the world of wildlife crime and my work. And hopefully I'll be challenging you to think a little differently about a subject that's portrayed pretty one-sided in the media and is certainly very much a passion of mine. So like Joe said, I am a National Geographic explorer, a geographer, an artist, a storyteller, an investigative journalist at times, and a lifelong conservationist, all wrapped into one. And if I'm being honest with myself, all of those titles and identifiers still very much feel like aspirations at times, and like they're goals that I'm constantly striving to better reach, or roles that I'm constantly learning to better fill. But there's one thing that has never been of doubt, and that is that I've always been a huge wildlife lover. And whether it was pretending to be a moose, chasing my older sister around the yard as she was channeling her inner Steve Irwin, Dev, I hope you're getting a laugh out there, or if it was simply just me being young and in awe of elephants and their wonderful trunks that I affectionately deemed built-in snorkels, probably around the age of 5 or 6. Wildlife truly had my heart. It still does, and it always will. So I went on to college, and I still had that love fueling me, and I landed, luckily, in the world of geography pretty unexpectedly. And my eyes at that time were opened to this wonderful lens through which I was able to view the world. And in that, I found a niche where I was able to actually marry my love for elephants and wildlife, specifically with a love of maps and this newfound idea of exploration and looking at the world in a spatial way. And so I did my senior thesis on something called elephant conservation biogeography, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. But, in that moment, I remember my parents sitting back and saying, Tara, it's great. You finally found a major that you're happy with, but what the heck are you going to do with a geography major? And I told them, I want to work for National Geographic. And, at the time, that dream did not feel attainable, but I obsessively applied for this geography internship for after I graduated. And my senior year, I managed to get the news that I had my foot in the door. And I was ecstatic. That's actually very much an understatement. I was like to the moon. But in the moment, little did I know that internship was actually going to change the trajectory of my life. And it would change me from a wildlife lover to a woman who was driven by impact. And my first day, I walked into the Geographic and I had stars in my eyes. I was in complete awe, just soaking everything in. And I was placed on a team doing research. And that first day, my boss told me, go on the computer, take a look at some of the materials you'll be working with, and familiarize yourself with some scripts and whatever's on the drive. And in true Tara fashion, I sat down in my cubicle and I typed elephants into the search bar. And up popped this 6-part series on the ivory trade. And in seconds, the brutal world of poaching was blurred as I watched it unfold through teary eyes. And the gravity of it all was like a complete punch in the gut, coupled with a sinking heart as I realized that I had been so clueless. I was this clueless girl who loved elephants so much and had the privilege even in college to research them and their interactions with humans in the realm of conservation biogeography, but was completely missing one of the biggest threats that they face. So there I was, sitting at Nat Geo, basically crying in my cubicle about elephants and the poaching crisis. And I decided that day that feeling was never going to happen again. I could no longer be a girl who loved elephants. I needed instead to be a girl who was going to do something about it. So I told myself, if this is happening to me, if I didn't even know these things were happening, then, that cluelessness is happening to so many others. So from that day on, I started to read everything I could surrounding wildlife crime, and I made it my mission to dig deeper, because I realized being a wildlife lover wasn't enough. And a love for a species isn't enough when they're dying at the hands of humans. And I found my passion in that moment. I was driven to understand the crisis and help make this information accessible and digestible and more widespread. And so there started my big journey, because that's also the same day that I found out that National Geographic offered these things called Young Explorer grants, which later shifted to early career grants. And I think you probably heard some of the explorers today mention those same group of grants. And that's the type that I ultimately earned. And so at the time, I was 22 years old, and I told myself, Tara, you are going to apply for one of these grants by the time you are 25 years old. And I didn't know the details of it yet, but I knew that it would be centered around wildlife crime and making it easier to understand the complexities behind it. But I knew for sure that I was not ready to apply just yet. I first needed to talk to the men and women living with the crisis firsthand. And so now I'm going to attempt to share my screen and switch over to some images, because you've been stuck looking at my face too much. So let me get this going. I hope it works. Here we go. And so here I planned this trip to South Africa to visit 5 different anti-poaching units during the course of a month or so. And my sole purpose of going there was to actually be able to hear from people on the ground and understand the challenges they were facing. Because I knew that there was no way that I could write this grant around wildlife crime, let alone the poaching crisis in South Africa, without talking to the individuals on the ground. And, I was living a world away in the United States, and I knew my perspective, based on the articles that I had read, was missing so much of the picture, and honestly, one of the most important part of that picture. So I spoke with field rangers and anti-poaching units, and I honestly spoke to any individual on the landscape that would listen, that would give me some time. I spent time with canine units, and I really saw how important and integral dogs are in the anti-poaching world. I tracked rhino with rangers using telemetry in the bush, and we went and actually found both white and black rhino, and we were able to approach them on foot. And I was so humbled by that experience and the ease in which we could do it, because, especially knowing that a poacher does the exact same. And in those shoes, the outcome would be entirely different if a poacher were standing there rather than me. I also went out on night patrol to understand that side of the life of a ranger. And on border patrol, I spent time with an all-female anti-poaching unit called the Black Mambas. And I also spent time at a rhino sanctuary and learned about the security issues that their operation, the unique operation they have, faces. And I also saw the devastating impact of poaching on the youngest and most vulnerable individuals of a species. I went on overnight deployment with rangers, and I saw that whole organization behind it. I spent so much time chatting, and actually also took a stab at training with some of these rangers. But what I learned from these conversations that kept resurfacing was that the only reason poaching was still happening was because of inside involvement. And stats were thrown around to me that somewhere up to 99% of poaching incursions or poaching incidents were linked back to inside involvement. And I thought, that got me hooked. It was something I had never heard of before. And I thought to myself, this is a story. And understanding that there were so many complexities behind the poaching that I was, on the ground talking about, including inside involvement, it changed my whole perspective on poaching. Hearing the stories of the real people involved made it all the more compelling and also all the more urgent, especially given that their stories and this challenge of inside involvement was not being talked about in so much of that current media narrative. So I decided I needed to highlight these stories in this grant I wanted to write. So I came back to the States, I worked on my grant proposal, and I worked and reworked this idea until I was confident in it. And surprise, I received that early career storytelling grant when I was 25. And, I got it to go to South Africa and actually dive into the socioeconomic drive behind the poaching crisis, asking and investigating what it is that's actually causing individuals to choose to actively kill rhino in order to gain income. I knew there had to be a bigger explanation behind the why, and so that's what I did. And let me tell you, if you can't see from this photo that was taken just moments after I read the news that I got the grant, it truly was another one of the best days of my life in my small, relatively small human existence. So let me situate you a little bit for where the grant work takes place. I spent time in South Africa, which is the southernmost country in the continent of Africa. And I was specifically in Kruger and the Greater Kruger ecosystem. So this is one of the South African national parks that's in the northeastern part of the country. And, this park is one of the larger parks. It's actually about the size of New Jersey. But the important thing is that it's home to the largest wild population of rhino left on the planet. And that's actually less than 4,000 individuals between the black and white rhino that live there. And as you can imagine, if that's where the highest concentration of rhino remain, that's also where all this poaching is happening. It's a hot spot. And so I was going there to investigate this human side of the poaching crisis, understanding that socioeconomic drive, understanding why people are doing this to begin with. And I had to figure out a way to make the complexities behind it more digestible for those of us living worlds away from the African bush and the boots on the ground. So I arrived in South Africa, my heart full and my nerves high, ready to dive into the grant work on this adventure towards impact. My days were packed with interviews and talks with rangers and other individuals working in the parks and reserves. But I also managed to tackle quite a few fears, especially this one, me being this American girl learning to drive a manual vehicle for the first time on the opposite side of the road in my little dust-covered two-door rattle trap of a vehicle that was affectionately named Humphrey by his owner. And let me tell you that Humphrey and I definitely shared quite the bonding experience that was often laced with a little bit of profanity on my end. But here is a little glimpse at what the African roads Humphrey and I tackled together looked like. Thankfully, there was no wildlife to be seen while I was doing this video. Otherwise, I wouldn't have felt comfortable taking it. But I learned a lot from that experience. And I was also out photographing homes of known rhino poachers from the backseat of a bakkie, also known as a pickup truck, riding through a community known as Rhino Park. And, the entire community looked really prosperous. There were second levels of homes being built left and right, and you could see all the bricks lining the streets. So it really looked like there was all this economic prosperity. But I was told by these investigators, it was all built on money from rhino poaching, which is why it was called Rhino Park. I also sat in awe with my heart thumping, squished between hound dogs and rangers and a dog handler in a helicopter in pursuit of 3 known poachers in the bush, and I witnessed the incredible intensity of a ranger's life in Kruger firsthand. And I also gazed with my breath completely taken from me by a bright full moon in Kruger, knowing that simultaneously it was a really ominous sign because poaching is so high at times of high visibility, such as a full moon. But I will save all the rest of those adventures for another time, because right now I want to take a step back and have you reflect on how you view the poaching crisis. When I say the word poaching, what is it that comes to mind? For a lot of you, it's probably wildlife. Maybe you're thinking about one of these, white rhino out in the bush, or perhaps an elephant. And maybe it's accompanied by this feeling of sadness, knowing that this species is facing a really devastating reality at the hands of humans. Or perhaps you have a picture in your mind of something a little more gruesome. Maybe it's a rhino that's dead and not alive. And maybe that's accompanied by a feeling of anger, despair, and maybe even helplessness. But I imagine that not a lot of you are thinking about the people involved in the poaching crisis, the rangers, and even the poachers themselves. And perhaps you are, but what happens when you do? What emotions are you feeling? And when I say the word poacher, what is it that comes to your mind? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get back to chatting with you all. And so now everyone's sitting here thinking about, poacher, what comes to your mind? And I don't want to stick words in your mouth, but I think a lot of you might be thinking that, a poacher is a bad guy. But when we look at how the media portrays the poaching crisis, that's not all that surprising, because it's often framed with sensationalized language that paints a war against poaching, a battle for elephants, a battle for rhino, in this very one-sided narrative that is so easily translated to hearing a war on poachers themselves. But I challenge you all to think why this can be damaging. A war on poachers is easily deduced to the idea that a dead poacher is a solution. But in reality, based on all these conversations that I've had with rangers and anti-poaching units, a dead poacher has just 10 more out in the bush ready to take his place. And these individuals are often being recruited into a system that exploits them and the economic environment that they live in. So instead, I implore you to be thinking why these individuals are turning to poach to begin with. Because without understanding that, we're never going to be able to address the issues behind it and help end the crisis. And when we dive even further into this, we realize there is a whole slew of complex challenges that are facing anti-poaching efforts that are only perpetuating the situation. Nothing in this is simple to understand, but it's often simplified. And with this narrative, we're also often left with the idea that poaching is ongoing because rangers aren't able to catch the poachers. But in reality, the exact opposite is factual. Rangers in South Africa, and especially Kruger National Park, excel at their jobs keeping poachers from entering the park, which is exactly why crime syndicates and the leaders of these poaching rings have been forced to shift their tactics. They are now relying on inside information and involvement to be able to even get into the parks to poach. And they have to turn to actively recruiting park staff and even some of the rangers themselves in order to succeed. And with this set of calculated manipulation tactics that they use, coupled with threats, and then the corruption that's throughout the judicial system that stacks often in favor of the poachers, it's not really all that surprising that the crisis is ongoing in the severity that it is. At first, this recruitment starts as drinks bought at a local watering hole, used later as a reason for owing information to syndicates. And then begin these subtle threats, hinting at the location that's known of family members and the times of their daily activities. Then, perhaps humiliation aids in some coercion. An arrested poacher will laugh in the face of a ranger in the bush, reminding them just how futile their attempts at protecting wildlife are, and instead will urge them to turn to poaching as a means of earning not only community respect, but more money than their yearly salary can provide. And these tactics surface in many forms, but one thing throughout remains very true. If you give in, you are an informant for life. Once you're in, you're in. And so the grant work that I'm finishing up combines art and storytelling to provide a space for readers to anonymously engage with rangers and individuals who are prime targets for poaching syndicates. And it's my hope that by seeing that person in a portrait and by reading their story simultaneously, readers will find themselves in the shoes of these individuals, asking themselves the same difficult questions of how to dodge getting sucked into poaching, especially when your family is on the line. It's about constantly being curious and taking that time to investigate and dive deeper and put yourself in the shoes of those living in the scenario you're trying to understand. That's how I conduct my research, and it's how I've continued to live my life. And I feel really driven in this work to help spark others to find that same curiosity and that same sense of responsibility when it comes to protecting the global heritage that is our wildlife, even when we are, a world away and feel so far apart from it. I think it's super easy, especially in this world, to also feel disconnected from the dark parts of our society. But when we dive into a story and focus on the human lens, it often becomes much more relatable. when we start to ask, what is it that's driving someone to make a decision that we think is so morally incorrect, we start to see some of the truth behind that revealed. There's this manipulation involved, and there certainly is greed, and there's environmental and economic history and all these other factors that set the stage for the current severity of the crisis. And, as wildlife lovers, you don't all have to be like me and go down this path of investigative action and flying to Africa and going on your own. You don't have to do that. There is so much that we can do from worlds away to help with the poaching crisis. And number one is sharing these stories of the lesser known side of the poaching crisis, and therefore helping to shift this existing narrative to one that actually centers the voices of individuals on the ground. Because listening to them and the challenges that they face is critical in understanding how to tackle the complex reasons fueling poaching. And so if you take anything away from this talk today, I hope it's to always dig a little deeper and try to understand the lesser talked about side of a story. Step back and actually challenge that dominant narrative, because more often than not, looking at things from a different perspective is what's ultimately going to help us find a solution. So, the end.
Tara, that was so well done. That was such a great presentation.
That makes me so happy. My nerves can subside maybe a little bit.
There we go. Absolutely. Pat yourself on the back. You're doing incredible work. You're sharing important stories. And it just shows what happens when you're passionate about something and you go after it. A lot of people might say, working with National Geographic or being an explorer, that couldn't happen to me, right? And talk themselves out of it. But you didn't do that. And now you're helping with something you're so passionate about and you're having an impact. Very cool. All right. We've got some questions coming in already, but those who are tuning in via YouTube, don't forget that you can use the chat bar and on Facebook as well. Send us in some questions. So the first one, Savannah's tuning in and they're wondering, is there somewhere they can go to find more information about your work, or will there be somewhere in the future?
Yes, the answer is yes. I've been kind of putting bits and pieces out on my social media, especially Instagram. And I would be so happy to connect with anyone. I know, Joe, you've been sharing people's Instagram. And when I say it, I mean it wholeheartedly. Please reach out if you're interested. But I'll be sharing things there. And I'm in the midst of finishing up my grant work and actually sending my deliverables over to the Geographic. So soon, hopefully, those will be public and shared. So stay tuned is what I'll say. But for now, the Instagram is probably the best source of that.
All right. We've got that up there for those who are tuning in who do want to reach out or follow along. That's where you can do it. Let's see. Lots of great comments coming up right now. Great work. Very inspiring. I think you might recognize this person who's very excited and proud.
Oh, my cousin. Oh, my goodness. Wow, that's amazing.
All right, another great comment here from Andrea. I think Andrea is joining us in Costa Rica. She's very excited that you are, it's sad that the animals are dying, but it's important to understand the why. So good stuff. All right. Well, I need to know, and I think the audience will be curious to know, what is it like training as a poacher? We saw a few little pictures. What's that as a ranger.
Not as a poacher. No. It was really eye-opening. And I feel really grateful that I was given the chance to do that. I think that a lot of times, I'm not a very tall, I'm not a very big presence. But I think that really played to my advantage, especially in that situation where I kind of wanted to jump right in and said, yeah, I'll train with you all when it was offered up to me. I think it was as a joke, but I was right there for it. And I was next to, all these different rangers and doing the push-ups with them and actually doing the drills, shooting the rifles with them. And actually my target shooting was much better than some of the other guys in the heat of the moment. I was thankful for that. And I, can thank my dad and the time that I spent with him in the woods for that. But it was really surreal. But it really gave me this, perspective for just how difficult the job itself is. The guys that I was training with were actually off duty, but they were in between deployments, and those days are not for rest. They are constantly staying on their game and constantly training to make sure that they're ready to do their jobs once they're out on patrol. So it was really humbling to be a part of that.
All right, you've got another really good question that just came up.
Yeah.
This is from Karina. How did you feel, or did you feel that being a woman helped or hurt your ability to investigate?
I love this question. I think it helped me immensely. I think that, as a woman, I could come in and not be this intimidating figure. And I think that really helped open doors. It was really easy for me to be genuinely myself and let the fact that I'm passionate about these things come true. And I think that people felt really trusting with me in the information that they shared. And I think, therefore, by being a woman, I was able to get access to information and places that I might not necessarily have had if I had been, this big burly dude coming in, looking all intimidating. So I think that, it's hard to imagine having done this project being a man. And I'm sure, they would have found their own way as a guy doing it. And there's plenty of incredible investigative journalists who tackle wildlife crime as men. So clearly it's been done. But I think that it was truly an asset to me.
All right, we've got some really good questions coming in. Here's an interesting one from Brianna. She's one of the hosts who's joining us throughout the weekend. She's wondering if there were any female poachers in the area that you studied. Did they ever mention that, or is it very much male dominated?
The poachers themselves are mostly men. I don't want to say all. Most of the people who are out poaching in the bush are men, but there are plenty of women who are involved in poaching as well, but it's a lot more subtle. Maybe they work in a concession, one of the rest areas at the park, and at one of the cash registers, but they know what's going on inside the park. So they're somebody that these poaching syndicates will actually target to get information from. So definitely there are women involved, but the people who are out poaching in the bush for the most part are men.
Okay. A couple more good questions coming in here. So Kathy's wondering, as an animal lover, how did you kind of push past that pain of seeing animals, suffering?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think I very much, the thing that weighed heavy on me in this project is the human side of it all, because that's where I wasn't coming face to face with like dead rhino after dead rhino when I was doing my research. But it is hard. It's hard to stay optimistic, but I think, I've always been a really, really hopeful person. And I've always been, that kind of like looking on the bright side kind of individual, which has also been a huge asset to me tackling something that can be quite dark. But it was always looking for the little bright moments out in the field, whether it was, beautiful lilac breasted rollers outside of my window driving through, Kruger and, their brilliant colors, just seeing them singing and, those little moments where wildlife were able to kind of flit in and out of this kind of dark narrative that I was so in the depths of, is really what kept me going in the times where it felt overwhelming.
All right. Well, Tara, I wish we could keep this Q&A going all night because it's such a great topic and such a great presentation and elicited so many responses online. So thank you for joining us in the first year of this festival.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to have to have you back for year 2 to see where the work is at, of course. But yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I'll pop it up one more time for those who are tuning in. If you want to follow along a little closer, see some photos, see some art, this is a good spot to do it.
Yeah, well, truly, thank you so much, Joe. This was amazing. And like I said, please reach out. I would love that. And thank you so much again.
All right, Tara. Well, you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, well, we have one more event for the evening, but before I introduce Lauren, I do want to take a minute to share an event, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event that I think really ties really nice and close with what we were just talking about. So, you know, most of our events may take place from a scientist or explorer's home, their lab, in their office, in the field with a really good 4G connection. But we do send satellite units out into the field, and we broadcast from some pretty incredible places: tops of volcanoes, coral atolls, middle of the rainforest, deserts, Antarctica, the Arctic. We broadcast from some pretty wild places. But one of our most exciting, I would say, events lately was on World Rhino Day. We joined Rhino 911, which is an amazing group that use helicopters to intercept poachers, to get vets out into the field when rhinos are hurt, to do anti-poaching things like filing down and removing rhino horns, because you know, the poaching is so bad in South Africa that by removing the horns in advance, dehorning the rhinos, it doesn't hurt them. They grow back over time. The poaching numbers fall drastically because the incentive isn't there. So I want to share a really quick clip from this event and then encourage you to go and check out this event. So just bear with me for a second while I share my screen. All right. Where is it hiding on me? Okay. Live right now to Nico, flying by helicopter. Nico, how you doing?
Hey Joe, good afternoon to everybody there, and nice having you live streaming with us today. Thank you so much. A privilege on World Rhino Day.
Yeah, Nico, it's absolutely incredible. We've done a lot of events around the world. This is our first one from a helicopter, so you're making a little Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants history today.
Oh, that's beautiful, Joe. It's such amazing to have all the people on board with us today. I hope the signal lasts. So I really hope that it can pull through. We're in a little bit of a isolated area, but we'll see how it all turns out. This is Ryan Jeffries, the vet behind me. He's assisting us. He's the veterinarian today, so he's helping me with rhinos today. We're looking for a rhino that's got a horn. That's potentially a problem for poachers, so you'll see them through the CP line coming through now. And it'll be the back one. We're going to dart the back rhino. You can see there. Joe, have you got visual?
Yeah, we've got a visual. We can see them on the ground.
Yeah, so we're gonna just gonna put away the camera now, and then we're gonna start with the darting process. Joe, you'll see the animal is almost down and sleeping, so we have to get the vet down just quickly to just stabilize the breathing.
All right, so I'm going to stop the share there and leave you wanting more. If you head to our YouTube channel, you can find the full event there if you search Rhino 911. So Nico, he was flying that helicopter while he was talking to us. The vet was in the back. They found the male they were looking for. They successfully darted it, landed the helicopter, dehorned it live for students. It took less than 10 minutes, and then the rhino was on its feet and then moving off again. Absolutely incredible. So I suggest you check that out. All right. So excited to introduce our final speaker of the evening. Lauren Eckert is a conservation scientist, a PhD candidate, and a National Geographic explorer. She's an adventure enthusiast, and she's based in Western Canada. Her research takes her to the interface of ecology and Indigenous knowledge, natural and social sciences, and terrestrial and marine ecosystems. So we're going to bring her in now. Hi, Lauren. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Hey, Joe. It's great to see you. You didn't warn me I'd be following up live from a helicopter. I'm in a slightly less exciting environment.
I've been kind of holding that clip in reserve. And just talking about poaching and rhinos. I couldn't resist playing it. But now that we have you with us, that you're going to outshine it, no question. So
I don't know about that. I have no rhino action, but hopefully I have a good story to share with everyone.
All right. I love it. Well, Lauren, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit. And then, of course, we'll be waiting for some questions in the Q&A section.
Great. If everyone will bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. No matter how many virtual festivals I do, it always takes me a second to get set up. So thanks again to all of you for being here tonight, and to Joe for inviting me. I am so honored to be at this this festival, Women Who Blaze Trails Fest, celebrating two of what for me are the most important things of the world, which is empowering and being empowered by incredible women who are changing the world, and conservation practice, science, and storytelling. As Joe mentioned, my name is Lauren Eckert. I'm based in Western Canada, coming to you from my office/room in Powell River, British Columbia, Canada. And today I want to tell you all a short story about the power of collaborative community-led research that combines multiple knowledge types, combines the power of many people, and also combines a diverse array of scientific disciplines towards building and better understanding a brighter world. Before I launch into telling you about the project that will dominate the story today, which is a project relating my master's degree in Canada, I'm going to start somewhere you may not have expected, which is in the montane rainforest of eastern Brazil. So 7 years ago, time flies, I was finishing my undergraduate degree. I was a student at the University of Notre Dame in environmental sciences in Indiana. And my undergraduate experiences up until that point had afforded me a diversity of research experiences around the globe. I had gotten to work with scientists on conservation projects in the high deserts of Colorado. I had researched forest deer mice in the Upper Peninsula of the US, and now had taken me here to South America, to these surprisingly cold, montane, highly fragmented forests of eastern Brazil, some of the most degraded rainforest in the world. These rainforests are also the home to the monkey that you see pictured here. This is a northern Muriqui monkey. I could gush about them all day, but I'll spare you. But one fun fact about Muriqui monkeys is that they are one of the only primate species that gives full frontal hugs, and they use hugs as a way to dispel stress and build community. And so often when Muriqui monkeys are being observed by researchers, by scientists, they get a little stressed out and they'll start hugging each other. They're fantastic individuals. It's a really cool species. And they're also, unfortunately, highly endangered because their home has been so fragmented by deforestation, mostly for the creation of coffee plantations in eastern Brazil. Now, I was a wide-eyed, very early career scientist on a project that I was really excited about, looking for these Muriqui monkeys. And our job, led by Brazilian researchers and scientists, was to find these monkeys and write very basic information about them, demography. So we were out to learn about where these monkeys live, how many are in each family group, how old they seem to be, what they do during the day, their general behavior, etc. And so I was a technician on this project, and I was so excited when we got there because I could not wait to see my first Muriqui in the wild. First day came and went without seeing a Muriqui, and I thought, oh, it's okay. I have tons of time still here to do this work. 14 days passed, walking 8 hours in the forest every day, up and down these montane stretches. And as an early and naive ecologist, I was bummed out. This was exhausting field work, and it didn't slip past me that we were wasting a lot of time and expensive resources and researchers' time just trying to begin the research that we were setting out to do to conserve this species. So eventually, after 2 weeks of fruitless efforts, we did something that in retrospect should have been one of our first moves. And we invited a local guide, someone who worked at the local field station who had grown up in the Mata Atlântica rainforest, named São João. And we invited him to come into the field with us. Now, João came boasting extra homegrown coffee for the researchers and a serious certainty that he was going to be able to help us locate the monkeys. Now, I was in my 4th year of my Bachelor's of Science degree, and I was certain I had been exposed to all the important knowledge there is to find in the world of Western science and academia, which was wrong on many counts, as I would come to learn. But João had no formal education. He hadn't had the biological training I had been privileged to have, but he had grown up in this place, this rainforest so foreign to me that he called home. And despite my doubts in his capabilities and his knowledge source, Within 2 hours, João had us in sight of our marquee monkeys, a huge family group of at least 10 individuals sporting one brand new baby monkey, and also had a knowing laugh at my elatement and disbelief. And it was a moment of my very early career that would solidify a lot of lessons I had learned across my experience in the sciences and in the field, and also would lead me down the career path that I am now on. And that experience, combined with other experiences during my undergraduate degree, led me to 2 realizations. The first is that knowledge types not based in the narrow halls of the academy, not based in Western sciences and Western knowledge, are critical for informing and understanding management and ecosystems of animals that we hope to help survive through science and conservation. Not only that, but knowledge, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge of peoples around the world is valuable in its own right, even though it's different from Western science. The second thing that was solidified for me this day was the growing realization that human beings are a critical component of ecosystems and conservation science and practice. And so often in ecology, we focus on animals, ecosystems, species we're interested in helping, saving, managing, when really conservation is a uniquely human feat. We need conservation because of the activities of humans. And if we want conservation to work, we need local individuals on board and leading efforts in conservation. And we also need to understand why humans do what we do. We're a fascinating species causing massive degradation to our shared home. And so these 2 realizations were really important to me early in my career. And I think back to this experience a lot because it was an aha moment for me. And they led me to my master's degree, which I'll tell you about today. I'm now a PhD student. This is past work, but a really incredible story to share about the way many people and knowledges can come together to better inform conservation. And so these realizations launched me to this much colder rainforest adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, where forest-covered mountains shoot out of the water, as pictured here. This is one of the most beautiful places. I was able to do field work from a boat. I remember when I took this photo, it was a particularly warm day, and I even jumped out and went swimming for a little bit. And this is Western Canada, the central coast of British Columbia. I'll tell you more about that place in a moment. And so I was offered this incredible opportunity to work under the supervision of a woman, Natalie Ban, who's based at the University of Victoria, and in partnership with 4 Central Coast Indigenous nations who led the project I'll describe today. Before I launch into it, I want to acknowledge those nations that created the project I'll describe and continue to carry it on even after my short stint was over. So those nations are the Newhalk, the Kitasoo-Hehe, the Wikanu, and the Heiltsuk First Nations of the Central Coast. And my acknowledgements don't end there. Something else I want to do is acknowledge that I today am coming to you from Indigenous territories as a visitor on those territories. And pictured here on the slide is a map from an excellent resource that I encourage everyone to check out, nativeland.ca, showing the territories of Indigenous nations here in North America, but providing insight into the world's territories of Indigenous nations. And I am coming to you live today from Powell River, BC, as I mentioned, which is the territories of the Tla'amin Nation and Coast Salish peoples. And in acknowledging that I'm visiting those territories, I also want to acknowledge that I, as a white individual, a settler, someone who is not Indigenous to this place that I am, have a privilege to recognize the impacts of colonization of Indigenous peoples across the world, but especially in North America, where I have lived all of my life, and recognize that that colonization has historical negative impacts and continues to have negative impacts on Indigenous peoples. Thus, part of my work is in recognition of the responsibility to support Indigenous scientists, scholars, peoples as they reassert their management rights in their territories, and to help promote decolonial research and lifeway paradigms. And I'll get into that a little bit more in this research I'll describe today. I highly encourage you to see whose land you're on and work to facilitate better recognition of whose territories we're visiting. And so now I'll talk about the 4 territories and the 4 nations involved in the project I described. So I was lucky to be able to partner with this organization called the Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance, which is comprised of by 4 First Nations, as I mentioned, the Newhawk Nation in Bella Coola, BC, the Kitasoo Nation in Klemtu, BC, the Wikinew Nation in Wikinew, BC, and the Heiltsuk Nation in Bella Bella, BC. And these nations are very remote. Most of them are only accessible by float plane. One is accessible by road, but it is one of the more treacherous roads in the world. And these nations range in size from the smallest at about 40 people to about 1,500 to 2,000 people. But their remoteness, as well as their inheritance of Indigenous knowledge and their government structures, means that they rely, even more than most of us do, on local resources, on local species of importance. So under this umbrella organization, these 4 nations have come together to combine their resources, their power, their Indigenous knowledge, and create, through the Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance, research programs using independently collected science collected by these nations and Indigenous knowledge to set goals around how they want to manage the species and the places in their territories. And so I'm going to talk to you today about a fish called rockfish. And when I first imagined visiting Canada's Central Coast, often known as the Great Bear Rainforest, renowned worldwide as the Great Bear Rainforest, I certainly expected to be gallivanting behind spirit bears in the rainforest, but that was not the case. For my research, I ended up studying rockfish, which I was kind of meh about when I first began my research, but now you can't really stop me from talking about effusively. I'll do my best here today, though. So rockfish are fascinating creatures. They're very deep dwelling fish most of the time, as you can see in that bottom right picture on the screen. The species I focus on in particular is called a yellow eye rockfish. There are 36 species of rockfish that live up and down the coast of the west coast of North America. And rockfish are fascinating because they can live a really, really, really long time. A big rockfish, like down in that right corner, can be as old as 100 years old. The oldest known rockfish to science was 118 years old. Rockfish also are really vulnerable to fishing pressure and ultimately toward extinction. They grow continuously as they age, and the older, the bigger, the more experienced a fish, the more successful it is at reproducing. So old big fish are really important to the population. And rockfish actually can't reproduce until they're 30 years old. So when older fish are caught and removed from the population, it's really dangerous to the health of that population. They're like elders of the deep who provide so much for the larger rockfish community. And commercial fishers, Indigenous fishers, and recreational fishers all go after rockfish as a source of economic, ecological, subsistence, food, and purpose. And so they're really vulnerable to exploitation. Also because that googly-eyed photo in the bottom left corner is a rockfish that has experienced barotrauma. So kind of like a diver who comes up to the surface too quick, rockfish can get the bends in reverse. Thus, if they're caught as bycatch on accident, they usually don't survive. This is a fish that the nations of the Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance warned scientists were in trouble. But there was no scientific data about what this fish population should look like available before 2002. So this is really, really not a good baseline to understand how these fish are doing. And here's just an example of how massive these yellow eye rockfish can get. As you can imagine, a big 100-year-old fish like this is targeted by commercial and recreational fishermen who want a good fishing story or want a ton of meat on a fish. But this fish is so important in the broader population. And so it's part of the reason these fish are so vulnerable. So recognizing these concerns and witnessing changes to yellow eye rockfish over the last half century, the Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance nations mobilized to better understand the current and historical state of yellow-eye rockfish in their territories. Like I said, no scientific data existed prior to 2002 for these fish, but there's a ton of Indigenous and local knowledge regarding yellow-eye rockfish. So together with these Indigenous nations and local scientists, we embarked on a partnership to understand long-term changes to yellow-eye rockfish by interweaving Indigenous knowledge, as you can see in this interview picture in the bottom where I'm talking to Ted Wackes, a hereditary Wikinu chief, about his life history fishing in his territory. Collaboration was the core of this work. As you can see in the top image, this is at the Heltzuk Elders House, and I'm talking here, I'm having a workshop with a bunch of fishers who have spent their entire life in their territories fishing for species like yellow-eye rockfish, and who have noticed every change that has happened because they rely on their catch to feed their families and themselves. So we engaged in tons of conversations with people, 2-3 hour talks over coffee about life experiences on different boats, finding and catching rockfish, among many, many other species. And while we were doing that, throughout our interviews, I also collaborated with Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance ecologist Alejandro Fried. And we were able to go out fishing. I felt like I had the best job in the world because we did hook and line sampling, which basically means that you drop a fishing rod into the ocean for a set amount of time and catch fish. And by catching those fish, you measure how many fish might be in the area, then extrapolate that to understand things about the modern rockfish population. We were also able to send a towed video camera down to look at rockfish. As you can see in that top right picture, there are laser beams on the video camera, so we could estimate how big the fish were. When I have more time someday, I'll tell you all a story about all of the times that towed video camera got stuck underwater, because believe it or not, rockfish like to live in rocky habitats. So we were learning a lot, not only about fish in the past from Indigenous fishers, but also about fish now through methods of ecological science. And here I'm going to get a little bit sciencey on you because that's my thing. So we were able to access multiple data sources to better understand yellow-eye rockfish. Here, I just want you to focus on the bold lines in the middle of the box as shown, which shows us the median yellow-eye rockfish size. Now remember, the size of fish is really important because the bigger the fish, the more successful it is at having a bunch of babies. They actually give live births. They don't lay eggs. So it really impacts how many baby yellow-eye rockfish are happening every year based on how big the average fish in the population is. So we summarized data that was available from scientific outlets, the data collected by the organization we partnered with, and the data collected by the national body, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, to say what is the average yellow-eye rockfish size. And you see it's around 50. Those two estimates give us about the same thing. They sort of confirm each other. And what you'll see here is that when we asked Indigenous fishers about the size of today's yellow-eye rockfish, they also gave basically the same answer as those scientific data sources did. So Indigenous knowledge confirmed Western science information. And it was really cool to see that story stay consistent across the many knowledge types that we were looking into, that we were examining. And this is where it gets really interesting. So the little box I just popped up, that median line you'll see is at the very bottom of the box. But what we learned from Indigenous fishers is that over their lifetimes on the water, fish size had changed drastically. So it used to be that the average rockfish was about 75 centimeters in length. This would be an 80-ish year old rockfish, really reproductively successful. And over their 50 years on the water, they had seen yellow-eye rockfish size change, which says to us, scientists, and eventually to managers, to the Department of Fisheries, Oceans Canada, and to these nations who are developing their ecological management plans for their territories, hey, something is going on here. We are losing the biggest and most important fish in this population and ending up with really young fish that might not even be reproducing. And because this fish is so important for people on the coast, this is a big red flag that was only made visible to us through looking at these multiple knowledge types and through these long-standing collaborations. And so here's a sort of visual image of what we see in modern rockfish size changing from the 1950s to 80s to today. As you can imagine, that's really, really dramatically important to understand for nations setting their management practices, for commercial fishers, for recreational fishers, for Canada as a whole. So the moral of the story, the end of my story that began with monkeys and ended with big, old, fat, yellow rockfish, is that there is an incredible opportunity to leverage information like this for policy changes in Canada and across the world. And our findings from the study support the powerful and complementary nature of Indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, and science, ecological science and social science, and also support the importance of Indigenous-led research and Indigenous-led management. Our conclusion was that the return of management rights to Indigenous peoples supports local conservation efforts and sustainable management goals. So the next steps in my PhD are building on this, figuring out how to tackle conservation challenges in Canada and how to implement what we learned at the federal policy level in Canada. And I'm sure I'll be able to tell you all about that some other time. But that is all the time I have today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'm excited to hear any questions you may have.
All right. Awesome, Lauren. Thank you so much for sharing. You mentioned rhinos, following rhinos, but starting with monkeys, that's pretty well played. I think you countered that pretty well.
They're very charismatic.
All right. Very cool. So those who are tuning in, don't forget, we've got the chat bars on both Facebook and YouTube. So please send us in some questions. But let's get started with a couple that we have. First one being, when you approach the Indigenous community to work with them, did you find any hesitancy, maybe some skepticism at first?
Sure. I think there's a lot of really deserved skepticism for scientists, especially settler scientists like myself, engaging in research and collaboration with Indigenous nations because of a long history, not just of colonization, but also of parachute science, of this model of extractive or exploitative science by settler scientists at academic institutions. Key in this research to building positive collaborative relationships was that I entered a project that was ongoing, a relationship that was ongoing between my supervisor, who has committed to working with these nations for the long term, and these nations. And in addition to that, whereas a lot of models of parachute science, which we're moving beyond, I think, in ecology and conservation, have settler scholars arriving to communities and proposing their own research and then extracting the results for their career and moving on. Whereas in this context, I was really lucky to be able to become a partner on this work already in progress, where the nations had already outlined their goals for research. So I was able to use my academic skills to help them reach some of their goals in what is a much larger project that continues on to this day, and that has seen some really neat policy changes emerge because of the work led by these nations. So there wasn't a lot of hesitancy surrounding this project because of the carefully laid power structures, the reality that the Indigenous nations had defined questions that they wanted answered, and that there were clear deliverables from the academic side of things early on in the relationship. And I think that's a model that is building and continuing. Dr. Andrea Reed is going to be a speaker in this series. And she and I have recently worked on a project regarding a two-eyed seeing framework, where those things, the power sharing opportunities and knowledge sharings, are formalized in a framework that makes sure there's mutual benefit, so as to move beyond these paradigms of like extraction and exploitation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. There's a wealth of Indigenous knowledge that isn't being tapped right now, that could go a long way with Western science. What do you think the next step is to make it a little more mainstream, or to more scientists to reach to the Indigenous communities?
I think It's a really challenging question. I think especially for like a settler scientist to answer. But I do think that we live in really, really exciting times where opportunities for work like this is coming up more and more every day. I think the next step is for scholars, policymakers, academics, folks in predominantly Western institutions to accept, one, that Indigenous knowledge is valid in its own right, that it's not only when Indigenous knowledge is like subsumed into Western science that it's valuable, but also that scholars, academics, policymakers need to recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples to create management plans for their own territories using their own knowledge or combining their knowledge with other scientific studies in their territories led by them, but also to follow Indigenous leaders, Indigenous scientists, Indigenous scholars. And we really live in an awesome time where that conversation, especially in Western Canada, is coming to the fore. And so I think a lot of what we as settlers need to do is listen and follow all of the leaders that are speaking really publicly and acting publicly as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. You mentioned that there was quite a few times that your camera was snagged. What was your protocol, your method of camera retrieval?
Yeah, so Dr. Alejandro Fried was the lead on the ecology side of this study, and he continues to work on this stuff to this day. And he had this, as you can imagine, very expensive, very fancy underwater camera. But it wasn't an ROV, so we had it attached to a very long insulated electrical line that would go out like 500 meters from the vessel we were on to get underwater. And we were trying to see where rockfish are, how many there were, how big they were. And I think probably 4 or 5 times in one summer, that tow camera would get wedged. It was only about this big, but it was really heavy to pull. I had crazy forearms that summer from pulling at this camera that was underwater under the current. And what would happen is it would get wedged, and so we would have to have the boat driver, usually a guardian watchman from whatever nation that we were working in, circle where we thought it was stuck, because if we pulled too hard, we knew we could possibly pull the wire off the camera and lose our expensive gear at the bottom of the sea. And so you had this really comical situation play out where the boat would be circling this random spot, and someone would be staring at a tiny feed, the live feed from the camera on the boat, trying to tell us if it moved, and then one person would be just pulling as hard as they could trying to get it unstuck. There was one situation where this happened, and the person watching the screen trying to tell us where the camera was got very seasick because we were on very choppy waters. And one of the days that I wasn't on the boat, I was in town talking to people. The camera was lost forever at the bottom of the sea. It eventually was replaced, but it is a classic example of the surprising challenges that come with ecological research and the limitations therein. Even fancy equipment doesn't always do what you want it to.
No, I think that's pretty inherent with all technology,
Yeah.
that it doesn't always do or cooperate on any given day.
No, definitely no.
All right, very cool. So you mentioned guardian watchmen. So through Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, when we worked with the Gordani and Chani Wenjack Fund, we hosted a guardian watchman. For those tuning in who might not be familiar, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's an incredible program that many folks are becoming more and more familiar with. So essentially, I talked a lot about Indigenous management, and part of management for Indigenous nations on the coast is also monitoring. You can't manage whole swaths of Indigenous territory or any ecosystem without knowing what's going on the ground. And so Guardian Watchmen are a program that is run in each nation, by each nation, but also sort of like a collective force. There are a lot of meetings of Guardian Watchmen, and they're tasked with research in their own territories, monitoring ecosystems in their own territories, informing territory visitors of local law, for instance, surrounding things like harvesting, and generally just spending a lot of time on local territories and local waters, identifying species. It's a really incredible program, and none of this research would be possible without the Guardian Watchmen who were on the boats grabbing those rockfish with us, helping us with those towed cameras, and who continue to do that work today. So the Tla'amin Nation, where I am now, also has a Guardian Watchman program. There are many up and down the coast of British Columbia and elsewhere, and I hope to see it continue to flourish. It's a really incredible way for nations to monitor and research in their own territories.
All right. So Christy is joining us, and Christy is just kind of commenting that fish size and quality seems to be important to those who are harvesting fish for their livelihood. So she's wondering if professional fishers are aware that there is this size reduction, and is your overall goal to see the population reach their former size? Yeah,
so this research was initiated because the nations who had been relying on these species culturally and for subsistence for, I mean, ultimately tens of thousands of years, but individuals who'd been relying on them their whole lives noticed this decline in size and were concerned about it. And the classic Western fisheries model, this speaks to one of our current limitations as Western scientists, or in the Western definitions of management. We think about fish in terms of abundance, so just like total pounds of fish that are out in the sea, which doesn't really consider things like age population dynamics, a fancy way of saying it matters how the ages are structured in a population. I mean, we think about this with people all the time too, right? How many, and what percentage of people are a certain age in a given population? It matters for the whole population. And so the goal of this research was to say the national fisheries management experts don't know about this age problem, this age structural problem in the rockfish population. And there's Indigenous knowledge regarding it, but that knowledge needs to be amalgamated. So it's all together in one place so it can be presented to policymakers alongside the ecological information that we have available. And so this and other studies really similar to it that I've been honored to complete with the Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance nations have helped to move the dial in the conversation on what matters in marine species management on the coast. Of course, Indigenous rights matter in that management, but also we need to start rethinking how we define successful management. Does it matter that there's 500 pounds of fish in a given place, or does it matter how old those fish are and how many fish there are and what sex those fish are? So that conversation is evolving. And the ultimate goal, is to help rockfish of all species, but especially yellow eye, rebound to a population state in which you have a healthy amount of larger elders of the sea who can sustain that population. It's a work in progress, but fingers crossed.
All right. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, sharing some of your story, sharing the importance of incorporating Indigenous knowledge into our Western science practices. The blast having you wrap up our first day of the Women Blaze Trails Festival.
What an honor.
Thank you. We're looking forward to following your work, and we'll have to see a little follow-up as you make your way through your PhD.
Thanks so much, Joe. I just want to say to everyone, feel free to reach out to me. My socials are Lauren E. Eckert, and I am happy to hear from you. I am always happy to talk to folks early in their career, women watching who don't know what direction they want to go, but know what they're passionate about, or folks interested in learning more about my research. Whatever you want to reach out about, I'm happy to chat further. So, yeah.
Excellent. We've got that up in a banner. Lauren, thank you so much. Hopefully we get to connect soon, maybe even in DC before too long.
I know. I hope so. Thanks so much for all you do, Joe. And I'm excited to watch the rest of the weekend.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. You have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of day one of the Women Blaze Trails Festival. It's been just a great day, a busy day. We've been broadcasting since just before 8 o'clock this morning. We've bounced all around the world, broadcasting for 10 hours live today. Saturday and Sunday are coming up. So do head to the website and plan out your weekend. I think you should just get some snacks and just spend, the rest of the weekend on the couch or at your computer, taking in these incredible events. But if you do head to the website, you can find what's coming up. We start off bright and early tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Eastern, with the amazing Beverly Joubert. She is going to be talking about the amazing projects that she's working on in Africa. She's a filmmaker. She's a conservationist. She founded National Geographic's Big Cat Initiative. It's going to be a great way to kick off the day. The images, the videos that she's planning to share are absolutely breathtaking. So we hope to see you at 8:30 tomorrow. Remember, if you are enjoying the festival, to consider donating to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, as we're raising funds for a month of free events for classrooms, which will add up to about 50 live events for classrooms. Also share tonight, tomorrow, day 2 of the Women Blaze Trails Festival. Share on social media, and of course, tag us so that we can amplify and see who's out there and talking about the festival. Big thanks to everybody who tuned in live today. Looking at the numbers, we had well over 2,000 viewing live, even more viewing the recordings. So we will be creating a playlist at the end of each night, each session individually, that you can access on our channel if you just search Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants on YouTube. So I hope everyone has a great night, and we will see you back here tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. Eastern. Thanks, everyone.